Have you ever wondered why some men, even in the stillness of night, cannot close their eyes without confronting the dangerous landscapes of their own minds? It happens quietly, at first, a moment, a fracture, a sudden awareness of the self, like Carl Jung described when he first became conscious of his consciousness. It is not enlightenment that greets him, but something far more treacherous, the realization that his ego is only a fragile construct built to protect him from the shadow he has spent a lifetime avoiding. For a man, this awakening is not a gentle process, it is a collision, a spiritual earthquake that shakes the scaffolding of his identity. He looks in the mirror and no longer sees a singular, coherent self. He sees fragments, desires he thought he buried, regrets he swore he forgot, fantasies that still burn beneath the mask of composure. When Jung became aware of his consciousness, he wasn't stepping into paradise, he was entering the underworld of his own psyche. And so are many men today, often without knowing it. It usually starts when a man encounters a woman he cannot categorize, a woman who evokes something deeper than attraction, something archetypal. She is not merely beautiful in the way society teaches men to desire. She is not just desirable, she is dangerous to his sense of self. This woman becomes for him a mirror of his unfinished work, the spiritual scar he cannot explain. She triggers not just longing, but obsession, because she does not offer comfort. She offers reflection, and most men are terrified of reflection. You see, the male ego is built on illusions of control, control over outcomes, over emotions, over desires, but a woman who embodies detachment, who chooses herself over his validation, becomes the crack in his fortress. She reminds him of every part of his unconscious he cannot dominate. It is not her fault, it is her energy, her stillness, her silence, her refusal to play by the transactional rules of modern romance. She becomes, for him, the symbol of everything he cannot possess, not because she is manipulative, but because she is sovereign. And so the obsession begins. A man can forget thousands of faces, but he will never forget the woman who forced him to meet his own shadow. When Carl Jung became aware of his consciousness, he realized that most people are not seeking love. They are seeking relief from their own inner chaos. They want someone to silence the noise inside, to erase the discomfort of self-awareness. But the woman he cannot forget, the one who triggers this awakening, does not offer anesthesia. She offers a mirror, and some men would rather drown in desire than look into it. So he stays up at night long after the body is exhausted, his mind circling the same forbidden thought, why can't I let her go? It's not about her beauty, it's about his unfinished growth. Because here's the truth most men are never told. Desire is not always about attraction, it's about projection. When a man meets a woman who lives in her own center, who withholds emotional availability, not out of cruelty, but out of self-possession, she becomes the carrier of his anima, the feminine energy he has disowned within himself. And until he integrates that, he will chase her ghost in every woman he meets, confusing hunger for love and obsession for connection. This is why some men never sleep peacefully again, not because she left, but because she woke something up in him that he cannot sedate. She made him aware of his consciousness, and now he must choose evolve or repeat. You listening right now, ask yourself this. Have you ever made someone confront themselves so deeply that it felt like rejection, even though all you did was stand in your own worth? Have you ever been the mirror someone resented because your existence forced them to face the places inside themselves they were not ready to heal? If you have, understand this, it is not your burden to carry. The woman who lives aligned with her own soul will always be dangerous to the man who lives in avoidance. And that danger will not feel like peace, it will feel like longing, regret, and a restless kind of love that never finds closure. There is a reason Carl Jung warned of the unconscious ruling our lives when we refuse to confront it. Most men, long before midlife, walk around hypnotized by distractions, careers, status, shallow relationships that ask nothing of their depth. But when a man becomes aware of his consciousness, the facade starts to crack. This is not enlightenment in the soft spiritual sense. It is psychological rupture. It is a funeral for the version of himself that lived comfortably in denial. And often, that awakening is triggered not by philosophy, not by religion, but by a woman. A woman who does not beg for love, but who radiates self-possession. She walks away when needed. She chooses solitude over settling. She holds her energy like a sacred currency. To the ordinary man, she is confusing, but to the man on the brink of consciousness, she is catastrophic in the best and worst ways. Because she does not merely represent romance, she represents his shadow, the parts of himself he buried, the dreams he postponed, the wounds he ignored. Her detachment activates his deepest fears: abandonment, insignificance, invisibility. But here's the secret Jung understood that most men don't. These fears were never about her, they were always about himself. She is the trigger, not the cause. When Carl Jung became aware of his consciousness, he saw that love and obsession are often reflections of internal war. What we desire is not always the person in front of us, it is the lost part of our own soul we see mirrored in their eyes. This is why some men, after meeting a woman who lives in her own truth, cannot forget her even decades later. She haunts them, not because she was cruel, but because she was pure, untouched by the need to be needed. And this is intolerable for the ego that has spent a lifetime constructing illusions of control. If you are that woman, you've probably been called cold, aloof, emotionally unavailable, but those words are often whispered by men who wanted to possess you, not love you. They did not want to meet you in your wholeness. They wanted you to soothe their emptiness. And when you refused, you became a phantom that lingers in their unconscious, long after the relationship ended. This is not about seduction, it is about spiritual confrontation. Because when a man becomes aware of his consciousness, he realizes that true attraction has little to do with physical beauty. It is about energy, essence, presence. A woman who lives in her center triggers the part of him that longs for transformation but fears death, the death of the false self, the mask, the ego-protected persona. And so desire becomes obsession. Obsession becomes regret. Regret becomes late-night rumination, long after the world has gone to sleep. He replays conversations in his head. He imagines scenarios where he said the right thing, did the right thing, held her close instead of pushing her away. But underneath these fantasies is not love, it is avoidance of growth. Because to love a woman like this requires one thing: individuation, the painful process Jung spoke of, where a man must integrate his shadow, own his projections, and stop outsourcing his self-worth to the feminine figures he encounters. Until he does that, he will mistake desire for destiny. He will believe that his longing is about her, when in truth it is about himself, the parts of his psyche he abandoned in boyhood. Some women awaken this in men simply by existing, by refusing to collapse into their emotional demands, by not rescuing them from their own discomfort. And while society might tell you this is cruel, Jung would tell you this is necessary. Because no man becomes whole by being comforted into complacency. He becomes whole by being shattered into self-awareness. The woman who lives in her own wholeness becomes the catalyst, not for romance, but for evolution. And that is why he cannot forget her. Not now, not ever. She is the unfinished dream he keeps returning to. Not because she is incomplete, but because he is. Some women live in a man's mind not because of love, but because of disruption. When Carl Jung became aware of his consciousness, he realized that longing is often a symptom of unresolved inner fractures. A woman who refuses to become his emotional caretaker forces him to confront this. And that confrontation is spiritual violence to the male ego. It is not gentle, it is not romantic, it is existential. The woman who lives in her own truth becomes a mirror, but not the kind of mirror that flatters. She reflects his forgotten boyhood wounds, the parts of him he hid beneath success, charm, or silence. He sees in her the freedom he secretly craves but fears to claim. Because freedom demands sacrifice. It asks for the death of the old self, the version of him who manipulated love for validation, who chased connection to avoid loneliness but never intimacy. Jung called this the individuation process. It is not spiritual awakening wrapped in soft music and incense. It is spiritual surgery without anesthesia. And most men avoid it until life leaves them no choice. That's why she becomes unforgettable. Not because she was his lover, but because she was his mirror. And once you see yourself clearly, you cannot go back to sleep. Have you ever wondered why he thinks of you at midnight long after the conversation has ended? Why he replays the words you said when you chose yourself over him? Why even after years have passed, there's a room in his mind where you still exist, untouched by time? It's not because of love, it's because you represent his failure to awaken before it was too late. She becomes the spiritual echo of the moment he could have grown, but chose his comfort zone instead. And so she lingers, not as a fantasy, but as a reminder. Carl Jung knew this cycle well, the anima projection, the psychological tendency of a man to place his inner feminine onto a woman, then resent her when she does not behave as his fantasy demands. This is where desire turns to obsession. He mistakes her for salvation, but when she asserts her independence, he experiences her as betrayal. In truth, it is betrayal of his own illusion, not her betrayal of him. And this is the fork in the road for every man who becomes conscious of himself. One path leads to growth, the painful integration of the shadow, the willingness to own his own wounds, to become whole without needing a woman to complete him. The other path leads to fixation, nostalgia, and emotional paralysis. He becomes a prisoner of his own projections, unable to move forward because he still believes she holds the key. But she doesn't. She was never the key. She was the alarm clock, the rupture, the symbolic ending of his unconscious life. Most women are taught to soften themselves when a man spirals into obsession after rejection, but some women, rare sovereign women, refuse to apologize for being catalysts. They don't soothe his discomfort. They don't water down their standards. They don't shrink themselves to fit his unfinished healing process. And that is precisely why he can't forget her. She does not become a chapter in his book. She becomes the blank page he was too afraid to write on. When Carl Jung became aware of his consciousness, he understood that true transformation is triggered not by comfort, but by crisis. The kind of crisis that shakes the foundations of identity. And sometimes that crisis arrives in the form of a woman who says no. No to becoming his emotional mother, no to becoming his fantasy, no to sacrificing her own path for his comfort. This no is not cruelty, it is sacred medicine. But most men, in the early stages of awakening, experience it as rejection. Their ego clings to the belief that if only she had stayed, they would be whole. This is the lie that keeps them awake at night. It is easier to obsess over the woman who left than to face the truth of why she had to leave. Jung taught that regret is not a sign of love, it is a sign of missed individuation, a failure to embrace the inner work required to become psychologically mature. So if you are the woman he cannot forget, understand this. You did not break him. You revealed his fractures, and he will either heal them or he will stay haunted by you forever. Some women become symbols, not because they intend to, but because the unconscious mind assigns them meaning beyond their control. When Carl Jung became aware of his consciousness, he realized that life after awakening is no longer about chasing love or desire in the ordinary sense. It is about confronting the psychic labyrinth within, where longing, loss, and projection collide. The woman he obsesses over is rarely the woman herself. It is his own unresolved soul speaking back to him, disguised in her form. She lives in his unfinished dreams because she represents the life he postponed, the life where he became whole without needing to possess or control another being. And yet, the masculine ego often resists this. It confuses awakening with punishment. It wants her to return, not because of love, but because her absence exposes his lack of self-integration. This is why obsession grows louder after rejection. He is not awake at night replaying moments of romance. He is spiraling through loops of what if, battling the shadow self that whispers, "You are incomplete without her." But she is not the missing piece. She is the mirror he smashed when she refused to be owned. This is the core of Jungian psychology, the anima and animus, the inner feminine and inner masculine that each person must integrate if they wish to become whole. When a man refuses to cultivate his own feminine energy, his emotional intelligence, his capacity for vulnerability, his creative intuition, he projects it outward. He casts women in the role of emotional caretaker, then punishes them for not living up to his unconscious expectations. He calls it love, but it's not love. It's a covert demand for rescue. And when she says no, when she walks away, when she chooses herself over his need for emotional security, he spirals. His conscious mind believes he's grieving romance, but his soul knows the truth. He is grieving the version of himself that was too afraid to grow. This is why the memory of her sharpens over time instead of fading. Most people tell you that obsession will eventually dissolve. But Jung understood something different. Obsession only dissolves when you integrate the shadow, not when you distract yourself with time. If he avoids this work, she remains in his dreams, not as a lover, but as a ghost of his own unclaimed transformation. And what about you? If you are the woman he cannot stop thinking about, you must understand, you are not obligated to shrink for his comfort. You are not here to soften the blow of his awakening. It is not your job to stay small so he can avoid confronting his wounds. You are not his therapist. You are not his mother. You are not his savior. You are the axis point where his fantasy collided with reality. And reality is uncomfortable. That is why he dreams of you at night. That is why he replays your silence more than your words. That is why his body may sleep, but his soul remains restless. Some women trigger this by existing in truth. The woman who lives in her own sovereignty does not become an object of affection. She becomes a symbol of unmet potential. And for a man who is not ready to meet himself fully, that is unbearable. So he obsesses. He mistakes his spiritual hunger for romantic desire. He convinces himself that if only he could have her back, he would feel peace again. But he won't. Because this isn't about her, it's about him. Carl Jung's work teaches that the unconscious projects outward what it refuses to face inward. So if he cannot forgive himself for the life he did not choose, he will turn her into the story of his regret. He will remember her not just as a woman, but as the threshold between his unconscious sleep and his painful awakening. And the more he resists his own growth, the more vivid she becomes. She is not fading away because she is not just a person in his memory, she is an archetype in his soul, the part of him that knows he must change or remain spiritually incomplete. Some women live rent-free in a man's mind because he refuses to claim the keys to his own freedom. And the key is always the same: individuation. Until he stops projecting, until he integrates his inner feminine, until he does the shadow work he has been avoiding, he will keep dreaming of her, unfinished, unresolved, untouchable, because she represents the moment his consciousness woke up. And once you wake up, you cannot go back to sleep. Desire and regret, they are twin flames that burn quietly in the unconscious long after love has left the room. When Carl Jung became aware of his consciousness, he realized that love, in the rawest human sense, is rarely about connection. It is more often about projection, longing for reunion with a part of the self that feels lost. This is why men, especially after 40, become haunted by the women they let go or the women who walked away from them. Not because of love alone, but because these women symbolize the moment the ego was forced to acknowledge its limitations. When a man reaches the midpoint of life, Jung calls this the afternoon of existence. It's when the persona, the mask he wears in the world, begins to crack. The things that used to fuel his identity no longer satisfy. Success feels hollow. Pleasure becomes repetitive. Desire mutates into fixation. And somewhere in this fracture, there is often a woman he associates with everything he did not dare to feel in his youth. She is the one who knew how to disappear without explanation, leaving silence in her wake. She is the woman who didn't beg for his love, but instead chose solitude over sacrifice. To the unawakened man, this feels like abandonment. To the spiritually aware man, this is initiation. She becomes the symbol of the life he could have lived had he not been so loyal to his ego. But this is where obsession takes root. For men who refuse to cross the bridge into inner work, she remains the forbidden melody, the song that won't stop playing in his mind, the unfinished sentence in his unconscious diary. His conscious mind will look for ways to rationalize this. He will tell himself it was timing, or fate, or bad luck, but the soul knows better. The real reason he cannot let go is because she forced him to confront his shadow. She made him feel powerless, and he cannot forgive himself for that. Most men are trained to believe that power is control, but Jung taught that true power is integration, owning the parts of the psyche that feel unacceptable, unlovable, or too vulnerable to reveal. When he met her, she ignited that confrontation. She mirrored back his emotional immaturity, his spiritual laziness, his refusal to fully awaken. And yet this is why he desires her. Desire is not always about pleasure. Sometimes it is about transformation. He craves her not for her body, but for the unresolved alchemy between them. And in his quiet moments, late at night or in the solitude of early morning, he feels this truth. He remembers the way she looked at him with eyes that saw through the mask, eyes that were not impressed by his titles, his success, or his charm. She wanted his soul, not his performance, and he was not ready. So he let her slip away, or worse, he pushed her away, and now his ego tells him she was too much, too complicated, too dangerous, but his unconscious mind whispers something different. She was the portal to my evolution, and I closed the door before I stepped through. This is why regret festers in the masculine psyche long after the relationship ends. Because the real loss is not the woman herself, it is the missed opportunity for growth. And if you are the woman in this story, understand this. His obsession is not always about love, it is about avoidance. He is obsessed because he cannot yet face the truth that your departure was the consequence of his own refusal to meet you on the level of depth you required. You demanded soul work, not surface charm. You required emotional transparency, not polished performances. And when he failed to give that, you became the symbol of everything he does not understand about himself. So now you live in his unfinished dreams, not because you belong there, but because he refuses to wake up fully. And you must not mistake his fixation for love. You must not lower your standards because he remembers you now that he is lonely. Your power is in knowing this. The woman who lives in his dreams is not obligated to return to his reality. She can choose to remain free. She can honor the role she played in his awakening without stepping back into his life. And this, perhaps, is the final lesson Jung would offer. That individuation, the process of becoming whole, requires letting go of what no longer serves the soul's expansion. Sometimes love is not about reunion. Sometimes love is about leaving the door closed so that both people can finally meet themselves. And when a woman understands this, she transcends obsession. She becomes a catalyst, not a captive. She becomes the symbol of the life he still has time to build, if only he dares. And she becomes something even more rare. The woman who knows her worth doesn't chase, she chooses.